Now beginning transmission 123, the Sentry. File under Andy Wilson Month.
Come on, you fuckers think that just because a guy reads comics he can't start some shit? I'll fucking take all you want!
Welcome to this week's episode of the Funny Books and Firewater Podcast.
面白い本と歌手ポッドキャストの今週のエピソードへようこそ。
Ignore her. She drinks.
Each week a motley band of comic readers / amateur bartenders attempt to pair cocktails with comic books.
毎週漫画の読者の雑多なバンドはスラッシュアマチュア入札しようと漫画とペアカクテルバーです。
All while trying to not sound like complete morons in the
すべ
process.
ての中にしようとして音ではないような完了プロセスで低能です。
Kind of like a speakeasy kind of thing. It's kind of cool.
You can find these idiots on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr.
Facebook、Twitter、Instagram や Tumblr にこれらのバカを検索できます。
No, what?
You read too many comic books.
We now join Brian, Jeremiah, Adam, and Todd.
They're used to curious sights which they attribute to alcoholic delusions. They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
I'm too sober for this shit.
Hey, and welcome to episode 123. This is the third book in our Andy Wilson birthday month. Happy birthday, Andy. Spectacular extravaganza.
Thank you.
There are cakes and dancing llamas and dancers and all sorts of things. It's pretty impressive.
No,
really.
Dancing llamas.
So
Yeah.
I turned 40, and it was about the most boring birthday ever. I worked all day,
Yes.
and my realization was like how much I enjoyed working really hard that day and all of the crap I was able to push through at work, and like the sense of like smug self-satisfaction. Like, yeah, I did an awesome job, and now I'm going to go home and hang out with my family. And it's like, you know what? I'm cool with that, and I'm officially middle-aged. Boring.
Yep.
That's right.
I try to take my birthday off whenever possible. Ever since when I was 12 years old, Trevor Archibald kicked me in the nuts on my birthday.
Yay!
Ever since then, my birthday has been kind of bad luck. Just bad things happen on my birthday. So, like, I try not to go into work, and people are like, sometimes like, could you come in? I know it's your birthday. I'm like, you really don't want me to. Unless you really have to have me there. Like, you don't want me there because things will go wrong. Like, it will. It's not because I'm like having a big party on my birthday. It's because I'm just sitting in my room hoping that the walls don't cave in on me. Like, that's basically just what it is.
Wow. So we ran into our mutual friend, Kat. Hi, Kat.
Hi, Kat.
And yeah, hey, Kat. So she has a booth at the Salt Lake Farmers Market most Saturdays. And she's like, you know, I'm to the age now getting ready to go out at night and partying. She's like, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
He's like, Adam does it, but he's like the only one our age that still does. All of us are like, yeah, I'm not getting ready for that. I'm just going to chill at home.
Boring.
There's a lot of truth there.
I think the best birthday I've had recently was 4 years ago. I got what I feel to be the best birthday present ever, and that was the release of James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy.
Nice.
That movie came at like such a specific time where I was feeling so burned out at work, and that movie and that soundtrack, I think, literally saved my sanity during that summer. So
God.
Thank you, James Gunn.
Well, we're only getting 2 of those.
Oh, that's a whole other ball of wax.
Yeah, it most certainly is. So
Anyway, well, bringing up balls of wax that should be brought up. We have in Utah the sole Utahn today. Well, we're all from Utah, I think, but Andrew, you from California?
Oh, well, I mean, not from, but lived there for 15 years. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That counts.
close enough.
That counts. The weird thing I've realized is that California, by a long distance, is the closest state and lengthwise that I've lived in next to Utah. I've lived in Utah for 21 years, and I've lived in California for 10.
There you go.
So, yeah.
So I started out my life in Texas. Then I moved to Utah when I was 12. So I've now been in Utah much longer than I have been in anywhere else. But there's part of me that still says, you know, I come from Texas, and I'll still go like that.
And I was born in California and now live in Texas. So,
Yeah.
That's right.
yeah.
I was born in the real happening place of Midland, Texas.
Midland, yeah, wonderful.
It's
Great town. No.
Yeah, no, not at all. There's nothing there. But, my old man was in oil, so that's why we were there.
Yep.
And I was on the...
I was going to say oil.
Oh, yeah, hey, yeah. But we were on the outskirts of town. I still have clear memories of coyotes howling every night. It was a magical time.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a magical place.
I actually grew up down the street from a peacock farm. I'm one of the few people who actually knows what peacocks sound like. Like, I can definitely identify that sound.
Yeah.
I can't remember where I was at one point in time, but I heard it, and I was like, oh, that's a peacock. And people were like, no, that's it. And I'm like, no, that's definitely a peacock. And then, of course, this peacock was walking the road. Like, how did you know that? I'm like, one of those things. Like, I couldn't identify most bird calls, but a peacock, I could sit there and probably go, oh, that's definitely what that is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really distinctive. It's like,
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, like-
I don't do bird calls, but it's like, yeah.
Well, the weird problem I had this summer, I was sound designing a show, and they had the script called for a crocodile roar, and I'm like, crocodiles don't roar, they hiss.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have the vocal cords in order to roar. So, long story short, I used the sound of the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. But that's a whole other different set of design choices. Anyway, I'm finally getting to this intro. So we have in Utah by himself, the once Texan, now Utah, Mr. Todd.
Hi, I'm Todd. You can find me here on the Funny Books and Firewater podcast, kicking it with you guys. I also do English class hooligans with my better half, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Hey, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Hey. And I do it as well with Brian, also on this show. That's the podcast where I can tell my parents about and say, listen to that one. Never mind this other one where I don't speak cleanly.
Right.
So... But that one is where we voluntarily do book reports on classic books where we should have read in college and high school, and going, are these still considered, do these warrant their classic status or not, and why? Yeah.
Classic status now that he's had his birthday. Once from California, now living in Texas, we have the birthday boy, Mr. Andy Wilson.
Hi, everybody. You can find writing over at Graphic Policy, and sometimes on the Bored as Hell podcast with Adam. Hey, Adam.
Hey,
Adam.
And coming soon in this week's episode, I will tell you all about the Hall of Greatness and where you can check that out.
The Hall of Greatness?
Yes.
That's a ballsy move, and I'm proud of you for doing it. I don't know if I would name a podcast the Hall of Greatness, because I would just feel like I would fall flat on that promise.
Oh, I'm not saying that we're great. It is all about celebrating things that are great and trying to identify what makes something great. So
I have a book for you.
Oh, yeah? Wonderful.
Yeah. Have you read, do you know who Chuck Klosterman is?
Yes.
Okay. Have you read What If We're Wrong?
No, I've not.
Okay, so I'm currently reading it. I love it. So, but his whole concept for it's one of the it's still sort of like his standard essay stuff, but it's actually like each section takes on a different topic, and what he's trying to do is he's basically looking at what from our current popular culture will stand the test of time and what future generations will look back on. Like, so the same way we kind of look back on like Mozart and Shakespeare and whatever, what from rock music will be the thing that's most identified, and what from literature. And so he basically picks a different chapter and goes over different things. And he has some really interesting things, philosophies, one of which as soon as I read it, I sent it to Adam because I'm like, he needs to do this on Cinema Queens, which, since you're a film critic, and you'll appreciate this, he's using this as a side explanation, but it's really interesting. He's talking about the movie The Matrix, right? And he's talking about how the movie, when it first came out, was renowned for its visual effects and its philosophy. And he says, as the visual effects become more and more commonplace, and as the philosophy becomes more and more commonplace, and more people, kind of take in that idea of, we are all in some sort of creative delusion or whatnot, he goes, the film will be remembered for something completely different. And what he believes that the film in future generations will be remembered for is the fact
Wait, let me guess.
Yes.
Columbine?
No, not at all.
No. Oh, okay.
It will be, he believes it'll be recognized because the directors and writers at the time they made the film were both men and then have since transitioned to women. And so he believes that the film will be recognized as a statement about a false reality versus a real reality.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And believes that it'll be a statement about transgender, and all sorts of stuff. I'm like, that is fascinating and interesting. So I told Adam, I'm like, you now need to do The Matrix on Cinema Queens. So, and if he does it, I'm going to guest star on it because I'm the one who read the book.
Good. That's great.
Anyway, But that it's all about like looking for the greatness of things. So I'd highly recommend it. It's been a very entertaining read. It's also one of those reads that you read it and you feel like I'm feeling smarter for reading this, but I also am not necessarily feeling like I'm smart enough to actually have a dinner party with this guy who's writing this. You know what I mean? But
right,
which is kind of fun.
And part of what we're looking for is I believe that there is greatness in the mundane and greatness in like. The idea is somewhere out there, someone makes the best grilled cheese sandwich. That's
Sure. You know they have a competition for that in LA every year.
But even if it's not like a fancy one, like someone's grandma makes the best meatloaf out there. Like that's an amazing thing, and that should be celebrated. And so, what is it about all of these things? And I'm trying to. What I'd like to eventually do is bring on as many different and diverse voices as possible and just hear about what people are passionate about. And I'm starting with my kids. And so one of the first episodes is my daughter talking about this video game Undertale and the internet culture behind Undertale and all of these alternate realities that people have created and side characters that only exist on internet message boards. And it's fascinating. So that's
interesting.
Yeah. But it's great. To her, it is great. And it's what she and all of her friends are obsessed with. So that's what I'm looking at.
That's cool.
I'm trying to think of what subjects I could like. I have a really deep-seated belief about something, but I don't necessarily know if I have enough to actually fill a full podcast for you with.
Well,
which is I believe that there's something very important about the Pez dispenser.
Oh, that is a.
You have always had a thing about the Pez dispenser.
I have. I believe that the Pez dispenser is an iconography of kindness and friendship, because like it is literally a device that is built to
share,
to share candy and to identify something that you are into in some way or another. You know what I mean? And somehow identify yourself and show a sense of humor. Like it is a gateway thing. It's sort of how I feel about cosplay too. Like I didn't really understand cosplay until I first went to a con, and then you start realizing that cosplay is part of a like starting of a community and a conversation and saying, I love this thing so much I'm going to wear it. And you find other people, like-minded individuals who either recognize what you are wearing or are wearing something similar or from the same vein, or who are going to go in and play and do that with you. So like I feel like that's sort of like a small version of it, but like that's about as far of a philosophy as I can take on that. So
no, that's exactly what I'm looking for. But we're also going to go into things that are like, who's the best Star Trek captain? Like kind of basic classic debates, but then also like, what are the great challenges of our society? We eventually want to talk about like racism, incels, things that are big, important topics, but that are also great challenges. So it'll be interesting, and we'll be rolling that out in a few weeks.
I really like this idea.
Yep.
Because it's always interesting and what's not, it's a focus on the positive, because there's so much out there and going, it's really easy to tear down or doing this, but the focus on the positive of what's awesome out there, let's celebrate its awesomeness. Because on the flip side is with cosplay and whatnot, the thing I've kind of held on to is the highest grossing movie of all time is Avatar. And yet I have yet to see a cosplay of Avatar in the multiple events I've been to. And it seems, though Avatar made all the money for its time, there does not seem to be so much of a lasting cultural impact. And what does that mean? I'm not quite sure.
The other thing I think is really interesting is that there are, 7 more movies coming out, and I don't know if anyone is really, just chomping at the bit to see them.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
There's that Avatar land in Florida. I'm curious on how that is doing, if it's doing okay because of all the other lands near it, if it was more siloed. What would its status be?
The honest fact of it is that it was in a land that needed help with something, and it was also part of the new Disney push to do more fully immersive lands, whereas it used to be more lands based on ideas and then individual rides being immersive. Now their push seems to be doing more immersive things with Star Wars Land and Cars Land, I think being the first one of them.
Is Avatar a Fox property?
I believe technically it is, but the thing is I believe that all of the rights for that were held on to by James Cameron. So I think he produced it himself. So I think everything I heard was the deal was with James Cameron, sort of like the Star Wars deal for Star Tours with George Lucas.
Okay.
Lucas was making the deal with Disney. I mean, because they've had that for forever. I think that was the same story with Indiana Jones was a Paramount film, but they've had an Indiana Jones ride for forever because I think Lucas holds on to those rights, and so that's how I think the deal works out.
But that puts an interesting wrinkle into it now, where if Fox now owns Avatar, or if Disney now owns Fox, then they definitely have an incentive to keep that interesting and running, and possibly bring those films out and create some more demand.
Oh yeah, I mean, every major studio, no matter who they are, is all trying to create a. Well, they're trying to create a. What's the phrase I'm thinking of?
A franchise?
A franchise. There you go. Thank you very much. Because everyone wants franchise. Because the thing is that you have a built-in audience for a while. As long as you keep making semi-quality things and you don't go the, Transformers route.
Even the bad Transformers movies make a shit ton of money.
But
I saw the last night, and I don't think I've ever seen something that's such an assembly of clips that doesn't really make a whole.
Yeah.
Probably why I did well in Asia.
Yep.
And hey, I'm Brian. I'm
Hi,
a sound
Brian.
designer based out of Southern California. How are you? Yeah, I don't have any shows going on right now, and at some point in time that video game will be happening again, and and I do a podcast with Todd, and that's about what I got. So anyway, so this week we are talking about the Sentry, Sentry, as in like military sentry, not as in Sentry.
The wedding of the Sentry.
The wedding. Yeah, but they do play that joke in here.
Yeah, they did.
The basic gist of it, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Basically, there's a guy who kind of awakens and realizes that he was a superhero, and for some reason, no one remembers his existence. And he's basically sort of a mystery of trying to figure out why no one remembers who he is and what's going on with him and all that sort of stuff. That's sort of the basic starting point.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Is this a case of fiction becoming truth because you ask people now who the Sentry is and most of them give you a blank look?
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially because the original idea behind this was, hey, did you know that Stan Lee created the superhero, this golden age superhero, before the Fantastic Four, before the X-Men, before Spider-Man, and then everybody just sort of forgot about him because everyone else became popular and they stopped publishing his book, and well, now we're bringing him back. And this is, the rebirth of the Sentry. And it's like, oh, that's very interesting. And so kind of an interesting way to look at that. And we'll get more into that as we go into spoilers territory.
Well, before we get into spoilers territory, shall we do a drinking game first?
Yes.
Sure.
And now for sports.
Listen up, sports fans. Prepare yourself and your liver for this week's drinking game. Remember, it's only a game, and a dumb one at that. So don't take it too seriously. And above all else, please drink responsibly.
So I'm going to go with my drinking game rule. My drinking game rule I'm calling Stay Gold Pony Boy, for those of you who are Outsiders fans, or at least have read the book, which I think you have to read in like 8th grade. So it's every time the color gold is mentioned, take a drink. Specifically, who is it? Hulk calls him Golden Man or something like that a lot. But yeah, so definitely in the Hulk issue, you'll be
really
drinking a lot. Mr. Todd, what is your drinking game rule?
Member? Don't you remember me?
Oh, I remember.
Okay.
I remember. No, you don't, but please remember. So every time he's going through and it's like, somehow this is a conspiracy. People have forgotten about me. You need to go ahead and take a drink because no one remembers the Sentry.
So basically, the entire book.
Yeah, it's a game. It's a mean game.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty mean.
Okay, Mr. Andy.
Mine is also pretty mean. Yeah, holy retro Batman. Anytime the art style and writing shifts to be a flashback to a golden age comic book style, take a drink. That is also very mean.
That might be the meanest one, to be honest with you. I mean, Todd's is a little more nebulous. There are a few different ways around that, but yeah.
You say sober around the Hulk.
Sort of, yeah. I guess that's true. The Hulk remembers him. I guess that's true.
So you have that.
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, so we're going to go into votes as to, we're doing a one big vote now, as Todd has has deemed it. So we'll do on the count of 3, and we'll see, what everyone's reactions are, is whether or not we believe that it is worth your hard-earned time and money and effort to go hunt this book down and read it. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Maybe.
Okay.
Right, and I'm assuming yours was a yes.
Yeah,
but...
mine was a yes.
Okay. I mean, not getting into too much spoiler territory. Am I angry or upset that I read this book? No.
Mm-hmm.
Do I feel like my life was changed by reading it?
No.
I mean, it's kind of it's a fun afternoon read, but it's interesting that it hasn't made a major impact on the rest of the Marvel Universe, but there's probably interesting reasons for that. Maybe good reasons. I don't know. But we can get into that, when we get into spoiler territory. Anything that people should know before jumping into this book if they so decide to go read it?
One of the things I think is so interesting about this is that it was published. This was their big crossover event, the summer of 2000. And many, many, many podcasts ago, I think in Ex Machina, Brian, you talked about how 9/11 is sort of this weird bellwether, like things that happen before it, things that happen after. This certainly seemed like a more pre 9/11 sort of crossover event, where it was kind of dark, but it didn't have the same sort of ominous tones. And I think there were certain things that they probably couldn't have gotten away with if this had been published even 3 or 4 years later.
That's a valid point, actually.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that does make sense, and that does sort of maybe put it in the context of why it doesn't feel like it has the gravitas that some of the other stuff that we've read does. Also, knowing that it came out in the year 2000 and it's called The Sentry, I see the punny game that they're playing there, which seems like a very Stan Lee kind of thing to do.
And
it does.
And this is also before like Marvel Wikipedia is really heavily used. When we get into the spoiler parts, I think there's a certain game being played here, and it wouldn't have worked even a few years later.
Oh, okay. I feel like we're going to be educated.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going to be educated by the Mr. Andy. So why don't we jump into a little bit of a break? You're going to hear a lovely little ditty that we put in there forever ago, and then we're going to hear an ad for another show on the Hello Sweetie Podcast Network. I believe this one's for The Spoonful, a bi-weekly. Bi-weekly is a weird phrase because it can either mean twice a week or every other week. But this one means every other podcast. I was just editing the other episode and I listened to the ad, so now I know what it is. So we recorded 2 last week, which is why I didn't know what it was last week. So there you go. Anyway, so you'll hear those little ads, and then we'll be back, and Andy's going to give us an edumacation.
All right.
We're going to learn us some things. So anyway, cool. We'll see you on the flip side.
Captain got to teach stuff.
If you have yet to read this week's book and would like to read it now, press pause. Go ahead. We'll wait.
I'm interested now, Andy. So, you might change my mind on this book.
Well,
I'm kind of wishing.
Before we start, I guess my real question, Andy, when was the first time you read this?
So I have a very specific story about this, and it's why it is a very special, important book to me.
Okay.
I first read this 13 years ago, this week.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
As in the week that this podcast is coming out. I have a friend whose name is also Andy, and he and I were great comic book buddies, and he was one of the people who got me back into comic books. I'd kind of fallen out in the 90s. I got into other stuff, and even though I'd been really into X-Men, I hadn't really followed what had happened post post Claremont era. And he started giving me stuff, and he said, "You have to read this book, The Sentry." And it was just one. He gave me a stack of comics for a very specific reason. We were about to have a kid, and my wife and I were, he just gave me a stack of comics to put into our hospital bag, so I had something to read. And one of those was this book, The Sentry. So I first read this book sitting in the hospital, the first half waiting for my daughter to be born, and the second half after she was born. So it's a very specific fixed moment in time, and I'm gonna cop to all sorts of sentimentality around this, that it therefore means more to me because of that. But I also think that it's a really cool idea. That being said, I think this is the whole ruse of the book, was that they tried to play this retcon game where they said, hey, guess what? Stan Lee made up this character that you haven't heard of before and everybody's forgotten about. And the book is all about how everyone has forgotten about this character. And, if you read, I think the most interesting part of the entire book are the last 5 or 6 pages, which are notes from people like the editors of Wizard and letters from Stan Lee and from other Marvel people saying how we decided to pull one over on the fans. And and essentially say, hey, this was a guy and we forgot about him. And but the book really isn't about that at all. And I think that this is one of those things where the attempt was really interesting, and then the way it was pulled off was not quite as good as what they might have wanted to. And I'd also forgotten. I thought there was a bunch of stuff that was in this book that wasn't, and then I remembered it was later in Bendis's Dark Avengers that they brought all of this up, and I was like, oh, maybe we should have just read Dark Avengers instead, because that's where all the other cool Sentry stuff was. This is where he was introduced, but I think Bendis did a better job with him just a few years later.
Well, and I think your description of good idea, not necessarily the best execution, is probably pinpoint on with my analysis of this book. Is the only reason why I gave it kind of a meh versus a yes, you totally need to go read it. You know what I mean? I think the idea is interesting. And in fact, the idea reminded me a little bit of, I don't know if you've read, Jeff Lemire did a run on Moon Knight, where the whole concept is that Moon Knight is in a mental institution and he's not sure if he really is, his reality is twisted, so you don't know if he really is the superhero or if his mind is just messed up and that he's actually just crazy. And he bounces between a few different timelines, and that general vibe, in fact, even the art style had some similarities to that particular book as well. Right. So I could see those connections. So I thought that concept was interesting, and there were some interesting things were done with the art that I actually really liked. I actually really liked the Hulk book in particular. I really liked the art on that.
The coloring made me nutty.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did not care for the coloring on this one.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess the thing for me was that and I liked it actually. I was okay with the art style. I think the thing is that if story-wise, it felt a little repetitive of him just going from one superhero to another superhero, being like, "Hey, do you remember me? Hey, do you remember me? Remember me? Hey, hey, And so that was the only sort of beef I had with it was I liked the idea. I think it would have been cooler if the first issue was people trying to remember him and maybe not remembering him, but they have to start trusting him, and he goes on through something, and then eventually they start to figure out that he really is the guy who he said he was. You know what I mean? But the adventure doesn't really it's basically the first half of the book is, hey, do you remember me? And then it doesn't really get anywhere interesting until the last book where he basically has to fight himself. So I don't know. But yeah, I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Again, if Marvel Wiki had been around at this point, people would have immediately seen through the ruse and been like, oh yeah, no, this guy never existed before. Why is Stan Lee lying to us?
Yeah.
And And I remember hearing Q on previous episodes talking about why he hated the Sentry. I think for that very reason, because they pulled this giant retcon and basically said, we don't care if you've read everything for the last 60 years. Here's this new thing that actually happened. And we're lying to you and trying to gaslight the fans into like who actually know this stuff. And they're saying like, no, this is a forgotten character. They're like, no, it isn't. So I think there's something. I think there's something there, and I think there's something to that. I love the idea, and I love that also. He's a kind of a terrible superhero. A lot of what his powers are based on are substance abuse and mental issues, and I mean he's it seems like he might be abusive to his wife. He kicks his dog in the first issue. It's like, oh,
who kicks their dog?
Yeah, Bob Reynolds is not a good guy. So I think that was part of it, and I like that. I like my superheroes dark, and I like the idea that they were taking this like very classic, good, kind of golden age character and making him super, super dark.
Well, at least the concept of golden age superhero.
Exactly.
No, I could get behind that, and I do think that idea is interesting. How are you surprised by a sales ploy like that from Stan Lee? You know what I mean? Like, how can you really be shocked that they wouldn't try? I mean, I think it is kind of a brilliant sort of idea of saying, hey, you thought you knew everything, and then there's this, this character and things like that. And I think in the modern era where you do have the wikis on everything, it's harder to pull that kind of thing off. But I mean, it would be interesting, like, because it could be a completely different book. Like, if it had been a real character that no one knew, there was one guy somewhere who was like, yes, finally my character is getting their due. You know what I mean? And for that guy, it would have been the greatest comic book of all time, because he'd, been a diehard fan of a character who'd only appeared in 2 issues of something somewhere, I guess it'd be like me when we did Star Wars a little while ago. If the murder droids suddenly got their own comic book, I would be super excited, but I don't know if anybody else would care. You know what I mean? So
those murder droids,
I think there's
are pretty
enough
awesome.
of a fan base for them. Actually, people would be pretty into that.
But the general idea though of like, I don't know, it's kind of a fun sales pitch though. You kind of got to admit it's kind of a cool. I mean, and they pulled it off probably at the last moment that you could do something like that.
Right.
Right. Like that was pretty much right at the very tail end of it. It is, now that I think about it, it is very interesting that this is pre 9/11, so it does have a very different feel of what's important. It does shed a different light on it thinking about it in that context, and I didn't think it would make that big of a deal, but it really kind of does.
Especially since that was exactly when I was getting back into comics, was 2000 to 2003, 2004. I really noticed how that unfolded like in real time. What worked pre 9/11 and what didn't, and it was really interesting. And then you see like the next major big event in Marvel was of course Civil War in the mid 2000s, which would not have happened if not for 9/11. And essentially, as again, I'm going to steal from my friend Andy, who said Tony Stark essentially becomes Dick Cheney. So, that was, that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. What, comics reflecting on the real world, talking about real world events? We can't have that happen. Stop putting politics in my comics.
That never happens.
Never happens.
That never happens.
Athletes need to just focus on the game, and comic books need to just focus on the entertainment.
Quit opening schools, LeBron. Jeez, stay in your lane. How dare you?
Help out your community. What a jerk.
I know. Well, what was interesting as I was reading through this, I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not such a Marvel guy. Brian was at my house the other day, and I think 90% of the Marvel comics I have is because of this show.
Oh, I think that's probably completely fair. Having looked at your comments, I think that's a completely fair statement.
Yeah, because I have like Earth X, and the 2 or 3 I did have, we actually ended up doing on the show, so that worked out.
Yeah.
But I have like maybe 3 trades that aren't show related, and I can't exactly say why I've got a bias against them, but it's
You also
there.
have a deep love of Batman.
DC.
So.
I do. I mean, so much so that my father saw my tattoo on that within like 30 seconds of me being in the pool. That was awesome. No, but back to Marvel. I'm not such a Marvel guy, and even like the Stan Lee Presents, I'm like, they're still doing that. And like in the opening of the issues, it's, you know, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but I was just, I don't really have a lot to add to this, I guess. It's the story was there, it was connected, and you've got this guy, hey, I'm here, don't you know who I am? And you've got Reed Richards being, I don't know who he is. He must be making this up because I am the great Reed Richards. And talk about a guy that's consistently a jerk.
Yeah, sure. Reed Richards is kind of always a dick.
He is, and it's, you know, I guess good on him for being consistent
Well,
in this way.
you want to call it that way, I guess, yeah.
If you want to call it that way. I did rather enjoy the art style for like the golden age era of that. That's one of those things I probably enjoyed the most about this book, is it's going back and forth. Because with that current age, with the coloring I had mentioned earlier, there was kind of like the colorist discovered, ooh, I've got this paint shop tool that I could have this kind of like this speckled thing across everything. And for me, that was just really distracting. And I'm like, I got it on the first 2 frames. You can stop now.
Agreed. No, that's exactly how I felt about the art. And as someone who is more of a story guy than an art guy, even here, I was just like, this is like not interesting to me. Like,
it was like early Ben Templesmith stuff. Sure. And, you know, we rag on Ben Templesmith, and probably more so than it's deserved. But he got better, and this got better. And it's an interesting inflection. It's prior to the 9/11 thing, and you can kind of tell. And is this just very much a product of its time that's just aged quite poorly of everything else? I mean, there's like this, the golden age has this, oh, look at the times of yore, wasn't this fun? And this was trying to intone, oh, wasn't that fun? But currently now it's not so much. It's really kind of what's coming across to me.
I think it suffers from, and I think it highlights the issue with a lot of crossover events where they do something to try to bring in all these major characters, but they don't have enough story to justify all of these different people being involved. And so the story just sort of treads water a little bit. There are interesting things, that this idea of this character having basically been what got Peter Parker his career that he has now, or, you know, being a factor on why the Hulk was able to slightly control his powers, and, you know, being someone who worked with, you know, the Fantastic Four. Like, those ideas are interesting, but what their involvement is in his story didn't seem to be enough for like a massive crossover that you're like, you had to know it is. And I think maybe they are a little bit better about building up to bigger things now, maybe. I think
they're getting there, but like another recent disappointment, I guess, was I thought the most recent run of James Bond movies, all in all, have been quite good. But you've got Spectre, which tried to retcon.
Yeah.
This villain says, see, I've been involved with you this whole time, and it felt so tacked on and not necessarily even needed.
The other thing, too, though, is because when that movie came out, I decided to go back and watch every James Bond movie that year. And they haven't mentioned Spectre for a long time. Like, they mentioned him, like, briefly in the 60s, and then they don't mention him again. You know, I mean, then it becomes all about Cold War.
Ever since they dropped Blofeld into a chimney in, that's like Live and Let Die or something, somewhere in the early Moore era.
Yeah.
But yeah.
See, and the other issue I had with Spectre, so my most hated movie one year happened to have been that Star Trek Into Darkness.
You still like Benedict Cumberbatch.
That's part of it, but he's involved with this issue, and Spectre has the same problem, is they've got this inside thing for the audience that has zero bearing on the main characters. And Into Darkness was such a degree as you have Benedict Cumberbatch going, it's like, well, actually, my real name is Khan. And even the actors on the movie and the show, and they're like, who the fuck is Khan? And they had to go ask old time Spock going, who is this guy? He's like, he was a real bad guy in my timeline. It's like, oh, bad guy. Well, we'll just take care of this. But it had absolutely zero bearing. So even when Inspector goes, I'm Blofeld, and that's supposed to mean something.
Where Star Trek had it in a better position, people know who Khan is. If not, for nothing else, than the William Shatner cliche of him yelling Khan.
Right, and that was incredible and awesome.
Yeah, but like, because like you can even not be a major Star Trek fan and know Khan. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, I watched every James Bond movie, and I don't think I would pull, like, if you were to say who is Blofeld, I wouldn't immediately think he's a villain from James Bond. Like, that name would not, like, it could be anything. Out of context, you would have no idea. Whereas, like, who is Khan, you'd be like, oh, he's a bad guy in Star Trek, at least. Most people would know that. You know what I mean?
Right, but it had zero impact in the story in and of itself. I guess coming through here, it's like retconning things, and it was just really what I was just bringing that up. It was a retconning miss.
Okay, so here's a question for you. How angry would the world be if the Sentry came in Avengers 2 and fixed the Infinity Gauntlet issue?
Oh, that might be my favorite thing ever.
That would be the
event of the century is what they would call it.
Oh my God. I just can't imagine how angry people would be.
They would want Kevin Feige's head on a pike.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it would be terrible. And here's the thing, though, is I was thinking about this. I asked this on Facebook like a couple months ago. I'm like, if Kevin Feige came to you and said Bob Iger came to you and said blank check, we're going to get all of the Fox properties. You can do any movie you want to do. You're going to executive produce it, pick your cast, writer, director, etc. What would you do? What would you pick out of the toy box that you hadn't done? And I was like, I would actually love to see a Sentry movie done incredibly well. But I would do it after the merger happened and after a bunch of the X-Men movies had happened and after Deadpool had happened, and have it be like, oh, hey, there's this forgotten character that Fox had that now we're going to do, and see if people would like play along with the joke. Probably most of them wouldn't, and so you'd have to do something with it. But it would have to be its own thing. You couldn't be like, oh, hey, here's this guy out of the blue who's going to fix everything Deus Ex Sentry. That's really stupid.
No, I agree. What I would do in that situation, I would get Donny Cates, and I would tell him to have fun, because I love that writer. He is awesome. So he's currently doing Venom. Is that the one, the turd in the wind line? Have you seen that online?
No, I have. I mean, I've been avoiding online the last little while.
So there's this little bit in Venom that came out, and you've got this Venom character going, we're going to eat your arms, we're going to eat your legs, and we're going to eat your face, and you'll just become this turd in the wind. And you've got a DC character going, turd in the wind, huh? Ha! And it just kind of ends right there, because it's kind of a funny, cheesy line. But apparently, someone who doesn't read Marvel, it's kind of a throwback in some ways of much of the Venom speak he has done in the past. But calling someone a turd in the wind, it just got me, and I thought it was hilarious.
Symbiote.
What are you doing, Sony?
Jenny Slate, I love you, but I don't know if I'm buying this here.
Symbiote? Isn't there someone's job to prevent that? Couldn't they still fix that in post?
I would hope so. They'd be like, we're going to bring you back and just do a little ADR, and you're going to symbiote.
Just fix it.
Just fix it. We're gonna pretend
they do things all the time between trailers and the movie. Just fix it. Don't say symbiote.
Fix it.
That's right. And then we'll all forget of what was that?
Right.
Type of a deal. Because that was more distracting for the trailer than anything else. I walk away, it's like, what'd you think of the Venom trailer? And you're like, symbiote, huh?
Yep.
I'm thinking really hard on your question, Andy, of like what I would do if I had the Marvel toy box. And now, is this just the Fox owned properties, or is this all Marvel properties?
No. I opened it up to Bob Iger, Disney included, and so my second answer is actually, I'd do a Marvel produced Condor Man movie, because I'm already getting my Mary Poppins with Lin-Manuel Miranda, so I don't need that anymore. But if I'm gonna pick a Disney property, it seems like a good time to do an action comedy Condor Man that is meta, where the new Condor Man is a struggling writer at Marvel who has been trying to make Condor Man a thing, and he's terrible. But he gets involved in Russian spying, which is oh so timely right now. So, and it could be ridiculous and hilarious.
You know, I would love a finish the trilogy of The Rescuers and do another Rescuers movie and involve all this somehow. Rescuers Down Under, that was my jam.
That was great.
It really was.
George C. Scott, he is a great Disney villain.
Oh yeah.
I think that I would do. I'm gonna like edit this and be like, no, I have a better answer now. But for right now, in my mind, I would do a really dark horror movie version of Kraven's Last Hunt. Is what I think I would do. Like a really dark, psychological, messed up sort of.
Like Hollywood Pictures put it out, kind of a deal.
Yeah, exactly. Do something like something touch on something in the veins of like Silence of the Lambs. You know what I mean? Like real dark, creepy, messed up. You know, Spider-Man crawling out of a grave kind of thing. You know, like just something really dark and different. Like, of course, I mean, all the moms who took their kids to that film would hate me, but I think it would be interesting.
No, it'd be all right. It'd be cool. Like Logan was a fantastic Wolverine movie.
It was.
And I'm sure there was a lot of moms upset at that one as well. And you know what I even like with Kraven? That was dark. It was doing a great job. But that moment when Spider-Man had to go to a costume shop and he had to get that costume of his old style, and he was so upset. It's like, I guess this will have to work. Yeah. And he was just kind of a little disgusted with himself. Was absolute
with
timeless.
With Spider-Mouse on the back, or Spider-Man on the back of it. The German. Costume.
That was amazing, and I absolutely love that part in the movie because it really was quite this serious, unending thing. But you have this things like, well, I guess I need a suit now, and he's like, Christ, this is what I'm going to have to use. Good grief, I'm embarrassed for myself, and I just love that.
I think for my vision of that, I think that's too light. I don't think that would make the cut of my film. I hate to say.
All right, that's fair, but
and that's what Todd boycotts my films.
That's right.
But do we want to do some cocktails while we're kind of? I can hear Todd drinking in the background, so seems like a good time as any to do cocktails.
Sure.
And since it's very fitting for this book, my cocktail is called the Memory Loss Cocktail, which if you Google memory loss cocktails, you get a lot of Alzheimer's medication hits as well. But this is...
Well, that's better than what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Really worried.
Well, I guess that's true. No, there was no roofies involved.
Okay, good.
Yeah. No, that'd be a different animal entirely. 1 ounce of banana liqueur, 1 ounce of 1.5 ounces of cranberry juice, 1.5 ounces of orange juice, 1 ounce of vodka, and 1 ounce of Chambord. Did I say that right, Todd?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. Raspberry liqueur. You mix all the ingredients into a glass with ice, and you can either drink as is or strain them into 2 large shot glasses and take it as 2 shots. But there's your memory loss cocktail. Andy, what is your mocktail for the week?
I've got a wonderful summer smoothie to stay cool during the heat of August. This is the smoothie of 1,000 or 1,000,000 exploding suns. First, you want to take some grenadine and drizzle it down the sides of your glass that you're going to put this into. Then, in a blender, take 12 ounces of peach juice, or if you can find it, mango juice. Take 1 scoop of low-fat vanilla frozen yogurt, 1 scoop of pineapple sherbet, and then as big as your ice cream scoops are, about the same amount of peaches, mangoes, and strawberries. Little bit of ice, blend that all up, put it in there so you get the nice little stripes of grenadine down the side, and it'll have these beautiful red speckles in it. Absolutely delicious. Drink that. Yeah.
See, I'd be tempted to add some like habanero in there because with that 1,000,000 exploding suns and a bit of the heat with all that flavor, I bet that'd be pretty awesome.
That'd be pretty good. Yeah.
There's something about heat in drinks that like I get it and I understand it and I appreciate it. Like, and when I actually drink it, I'm okay with it. But like from just talking about it or thinking about it on the offset, like it just seems wrong. You know what I mean?
The strangest thing I ever had was a sorbet that it was a mango habanero sorbet, and it was spicy as hell. So you would put this frozen concoction in your mouth, like, oh, this is so cold. My mouth is burning up. I need to cool it down. So you want to put more in your mouth. So it's so cold, and yet I'm dying of all this fire. And it was just this paradox that was confusing physically.
I love it.
It was awesome.
Well, Todd, what's your cocktail?
Well, mine is going similar theme to yours. I think Brian's going to like this one specifically.
Okay.
This is Forget Me Not is the name of the cocktail. I got it from the Bundaberg website.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. So this has 50 milliliters of tequila because Bundaberg's Australian and they're not American, so they use the metric system. 15 milliliters of Aperol, which I had to look this up. I'm like, what's Aperol? And it's a aperitif made of rhubarb and cinchanoa, which is another kind of thing. So it's kind of like a sweet rhubarby aperitif. Go ahead and take 1 bottle of your Bundaberg pink grapefruit juice, 20 milliliters of lime juice, and what you're going to go ahead and do is you combine all the ingredients into a shaker, you shake the shit out of them, and you strain it into a tall glass, and then you add the orange and lime wedges to garnish, and you enjoy that drink. Forget Me Not. It does.
Very herbal, kind of, probably, with that grapefruit, though.
Right. It's a bit herbal. It's not the sweetest thing out there. And
Yeah, but
that's okay.
I can see where that would work, though. I can totally see where that would work.
I really think the tequila sells it, because if it was a rum, it might, it makes it an interesting of, what is this I'm tasting? And it kind of has an interesting spread. I imagine the beginning and the end has quite a different finish.
Probably. Well, and I'm not much of a tequila fan, but I would probably try that if it was made with a decent tequila.
Well, what I'm drinking right now is basically a Moscow Mule, but I'm using the Salt Lake's Finest Garwood's Extra Spicy Ginger Beer, which is enough to burn you out on its own.
I had some of the mild stuff of that, and it was super spicy.
They have an extra spicy.
Is that what you're drinking?
It's incredible, but I've got it mixed with lime juice and then Hornitos tequila. And it is a bit of something else. I put it together, and Amy's like, you can stand over there.
Wow.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah, a little bit.
Love it.
So, yeah.
Oh, next time I'm in Salt Lake, I'll have to try some. I love a really strong ginger beer.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, then that's the stuff for you.
Garwood's is for you.
Yeah.
And their seasonal one right now is a grapefruit honey ginger beer.
Mm-hmm.
And that one's simply delightful.
Wonderful.
It really is.
Well, cool. Andy, do you have anything else you want to discuss on the Sentry before we move on?
No, that's pretty much it. I think that's everything I have to say about that book.
Well, then, let us go into grades.
Jamie, school is never a waste of time.
Since we have 15 minutes until recess, please put down your pencils and stare at the front of the room.
It's report card time. It's report card time. It's report card time. I'm so fucking fun.
God, please, no! 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 No!
Because there's a bunch of different issues in here, should we just do the Paul Jenkins as the writer? But there's more writers than that because there's the other individual issues as well. But for writing, for Paul Jenkins and the other writers, what is your grade, Mr. Todd?
I give it a C+. It did have a tendency to drag. I think this was a crossover, less successful. Earlier we did Vader Down. Now that was only 2 books crossing over, but that was masterfully done. That one felt so seamless and everything was important. It didn't feel like there was extra fat. This one has a lot of extra fat in it. C+.
I'm going to give it a B-. Similar reasons. I mean, and we've discussed before, good idea, not necessarily great execution, but I could see where this idea, Andy could make this into a really fun movie, I think, and do something interesting that way. And Andy, what is your grade for writing?
Yeah, I'm at a B for writing. I think the Paul Jenkins stuff, just the main Sentry book, those 5 issues, I would give like a B+. But when they hit at the end of that 4th book and they go into all crossover issues, it just kind of grinds to a screeching halt while we go down all of these different pathways. And some of them work better than others. The Hulk book, the Spider-Man book were better. The Angel X-Men book was like, why am I reading this? I don't get it.
Yeah.
And so for overall, it's like B, it was good, but there were definitely elements they could have done better. Yeah, like Todd said, trim fat.
Yeah, of those books, the Hulk one I think was my favorite actually. But cool. Then for art, we're gonna say Jay Lee, but there's a bunch of other artists in here, and so we're not gonna represent everybody, but we'll just say art in general for all these books. What is your grade? We'll go with Mr. Andy this time.
Yeah, same B. Some of it I loved. I love the retro stuff. I thought that was a lot of fun. I have differing feelings in different places. There are a couple of pages that I'm like, now that is a lot of fun. But those were very few and far in between in what was actually kind of a longer book overall. So, but there's very little in here that really astounds me. So yeah, just a B.
Yep, Mr. Todd.
I would like to break this up, and the retro stuff gets a B plus because I'm right there with Andy. That current stuff with the hey, look what new nifty thing I learned at Photoshop it's a solid C. That really just started to irk me after a while, and I'm just like, the fact that this is bothering me, and when I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, look what he did there, and it's the fact that I can see the technique, and it took me out of the story. Is my biggest problem with it right there. So if you take out the Photoshop fun, it's a much better score. The retro stuff is much better than the other stuff. So I give it a B minus all in all.
I think I'm the only one who actually kind of likes the modern stuff, and I'm okay with it. I do like the retro stuff a lot as well. I'm going to just go with a B. I think it's fun. I get where your complaints are. I actually thought it was okay.
So actually I would go back. Says the drawing was a B plus. The coloring was a C.
Okay.
So there is quite the difference there.
So I guess for overall grades, I'm going to sit at B minus, I think, probably where I about average out at. I like the art more than I like the writing, but I still think the concept's interesting. Mr. Todd, what's your grade?
I think it was Frank Capra says a good movie is like 3 good scenes with no bad scenes.
Yeah.
I can't point at anything here that was bad, but I'm not sure there were 3 good scenes in it. So I'm going to give it a C plus.
And Mr. Andy.
That sounds really fair. I like that Frank Capra scale. I'm maybe a little more forgiving than that. So, I mean, average both of my grades together, I'm still at a B. If I'm being really honest about it, in my nostalgia-twinged heart, this will always have more of a meaning for me. And so it's like an A minus personally. But if it were not that, and when we get to my suggestions, the fact that I know other books that other people should read also make me like this more than maybe it deserves.
Well, that sounds like an excellent segue into recommendations. So what would you recommend, Andy?
Go back and read Bendis's Dark Avengers book. It's a great segue into this. Dark Avengers is right after Secret Invasion. The Skrulls come in. They've been impersonating a bunch of people. At the end of Secret Invasion, spoiler alert, Norman Osborn kills the Skrull Queen and is a hero. And so he's redeemed and tells Tony Stark, I'm taking over. He takes over S.H.I.E.L.D. and he steals Iron Man's armor and becomes the Iron Patriot. And because all of the other Avengers are like, hell no, we're not doing this, they all take off and go underground. And so he assembles a team of fake Avengers to pretend that they're the Avengers. So you've got Venom pretending Spider-Man. You have, I want to say Deadshot, and that's not his name. You have Bullseye pretending to be Hawkeye. And you've got X-23 pretending to be Wolverine. And he rounds the team out with Ares and the Sentry. And through the whole of Bendis's arc on Dark Avengers, both Norman Osborn and Bob Reynolds are dealing with serious mental health issues, and but they kind of understand one another, and there's a lot of back and forth between the two of them, and they get really, really heavily into the Sentry's past and drug abuse and spousal abuse and other things. And you're like, whoa, this guy is not that great. But there is a redemptive arc for him. And so if the concept of the Sentry is interesting to you, go check out what Bendis does with him. I think there are 3 books of Dark Avengers overall, and you might need to pick up the Siege crossover trade paperback as well for that. But I think that's it, and that should give you the entire story arc of the Sentry.
Actually, I have that or I have that Siege crossover. I just haven't read the Dark Avenger stuff. But cool. Todd, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, we mentioned it a little bit on the show. Recently, Vertigo has put out the complete omnibus of Ex Machina by Brian K. Vaughan. So if you want to get into that, it's 54 issues in one book. And it's the entire run of Ex Machina. And it's worth a read. If you want to go buy it, In Stock Trades is your friend.
You love those big omnibuses.
I kind of do. And... I love them because you can get the story, and I hate them because you're reading them at your kitchen table and nowhere else.
Well, that's the thing is I like to throw a lot of comics in my backpack and then take them with me wherever I'm at.
You're not doing this one is 1,400 pages.
Yeah, exactly. That my buddy Christopher, who Todd knows, he always, every time he gets a new phone, he puts out a review online by how heavy the phone is, because he ultimately will be lying in bed, holding it above his head, typing away on the phone, and then drop it, and it will hit his face. And I just think of, every time we talk about one of these big tomes of comic books, I just think of lying in bed, reading that book overhead, and then all of a sudden it's like, so how'd Todd die? Well, he was reading Ex Machina in bed, fell asleep, and suffocated. So
that is completely fair.
I have a recommendation, sort of, but I really kind of wanted Adam to be here because it's sort of a movie nerdy thing.
I'll be your Huckleberry.
Maybe you'll be my. Well, and it was for you as well. That's why I want to do it. But have you ever heard of Filmstruck?
Yes.
Okay, so I've been trying it. I've been doing the 14-day free trial thing, and so for those of you who don't know what Filmstruck is, it's sort of like it's an artsy fartsy version of Netflix. They have the movies from the Criterion Collection. They have the movies from Turner Classic Movies. And they put together they have these movies, and it changes sort of like Netflix. They don't have quite the selection Netflix has, but it has a lot of older stuff, which is kind of something I grew up watching AMC a lot. And so that was sort of something that I always loved. I'm always, I probably one of my favorite things in the world is old Laurel and Hardy shorts and things like that, which are oddly enough really hard to find online. Don't ask me why. They're not streaming anywhere, so I have to buy them or download them illegally. Anyway, but Filmstruck does some interesting things. One of the things they do, which I think is really interesting, is I think it's Thursday nights, they do a double feature where they pair 2 films together. And the one that struck me as super interesting, and I've watched the first film. I haven't watched the second film yet, or I haven't rewatched the second film, I should say. Is they paired Ingrid Bergman's Seventh Seal with Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Oh, that is great.
Because it's both playing games with death is basically what it is. But it finally got me to see Ingrid Bergman's Seventh Seal, and I have to say it looks amazing. It's the Criterion edition of it. It looks, other than the fact that it's black and white, it could have been made yesterday. The visual quality of it is fantastic. It just looks gorgeous. But those Germans, man, I almost recommended it to you, Todd, because of a conversation we had about when your dad came to you in the hospital when you were really drugged up.
Yeah.
This film will speak to that side of you a lot. It is a film that's just a conversation about the nothingness and the futile existence that is life. It is super German, German.
Some people ask describe yourself in a few words, and sometimes I'll refer to myself as the happy, optimistic nihilist.
It's a very nihilist. I liked it. Don't get me wrong. I really liked it. And visually, it has some cool stuff in it. I watched this film being damn, there's some really cool visuals in it, but it's very nihilistic, ridiculously so. And we talked about Dieter from Saturday Night Live earlier. This is definitely a very Dieter kind of film.
All right.
But yeah, so Filmstruck, for those of you who are interested in older films, and for those of you who just have never seen Seventh Seal, it's it's actually pretty great. I enjoyed the hell out of it, but it's dark. It's super dark. Does anybody else have anything else they want to mention before we?
Actually, I do have a question as I'm perusing this right now because I haven't heard of it before. Andy, can you just describe graphic policy? What is it?
So graphic policy, the tagline is where comics meet politics. And it is it's a website mostly dedicated to comics, but I do most of the film reviews, not all. But we also have people covering comics related TV. But mostly we're just talking about comics issues. Our editor is this guy named Brett, who also works for liberal nonprofits in DC and very politically connected. And a lot of the people writing for the site have definite political opinions. We've got a couple right-wingy people, but it is a fairly left-leaning site. And so we often do commentary on various different things, but we also just have straight up reviews of what happened in Black Panther, Captain America this week.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at one of your reviews, and you have this line. It says, writer and director Chris McQuarrie delivers his best film ever for Mission Impossible Fallout. And my question for you on this is, where would you put Way of the Gun?
Oh, interesting.
Because Way of the Gun, in a lot of ways, to me, felt like an exercise of writing terrible human beings and getting you to like them anyways.
Yeah, here's the interesting thing about Way of the Gun is, okay, well, let me take it even one step further back.
Okay, yeah, so I'm really just putting Andy on the spot here, by the way. I think he's doing remarkably well.
McQuarrie is an amazing writer, and you look at The Usual Suspects and how well that is weaved together. It is one of the most perfect scripts, in my opinion, of the last 2-3 decades. I just think it's perfect. And Way of the Gun, I think, was very similar in him trying to do something similar, just, instead of gangsters and organized crime with Western motifs.
Right. The Queen of Hearts bit confused me for years, but I think I finally got it.
Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting. I don't think but where I think he has developed is moving into directing now. His previous films where he's written and directed them, have been, good, but I never felt like there was something that interesting to say with them. Like Valkyrie, Jack Reacher, it's like, okay, Tom Cruise wants to make this movie. I'm just going to kind of do this workman-like thing to make it happen. But there was nothing kind of astounding about that. I think what's interesting about Way of the Gun is that it is more interesting. And the only other thing that I would put in that same basket of recent would be Edge of Tomorrow. So I'd kind of put them in an upper tier. I just thought Fallout was ridiculously amazing. The way that they put all of that together, and even though things were telegraphed, I didn't care. It was like watching a live action cartoon. Sometimes didn't care. It was so enjoyable.
Also, just random side note, speaking of politics and comic books, so last week we read March, and I got a recommendation from Amazon, thank you Amazon, for another book by the same artist, Nate Powell, and I picked it up, and it arrived today, and I haven't read it yet, but I read the back. But it is also another book about the civil rights movement, so it's from a slightly different perspective, but I'm excited to read that as well. So, there's another politics and comic books sort of thing there for you as well. So, anyway,
what's that one called?
Cool. I don't know. It's on my shelf somewhere. I'm sorry.
All right.
It's too far away for me to see.
It'll be in our show notes, kids. We have show notes.
We do, but it won't be in there. Don't lie to people. They're lucky if I can get the drinking games and the cocktails in there. So next week we are going to be doing Manifest Destiny, which Mr. Andy, who picked it, will be able to describe for you now.
Yeah, so this is an alternative history comic based on the idea that when Lewis and Clark went to go map the Pacific Northwest and the Louisiana Territory that the United States had just gotten, they did it because there's monsters out there.
Awesome.
So this is the first of the books that I have not actually read, but it was recommended to me and immediately hit me like, oh, that's something that I should enjoy. So if it's terrible, I'm sorry, but it seems like it should be pretty good. And the fact that there have been several of these tell me that it's got some sort of an audience. So there we go. Lewis and Clark and monsters.
Cool. How do you go wrong with that?
I don't know. Hopefully we will not find out.
And next week we will reveal to you the next month's books, but I will tell you the theme right now. The team we're calling Go Sports or Sports Ball or something like that. We're doing all sports-related comic books. One of the dead giveaways is one of the inspirations was I was reading the most recent trade of Southern Bastards, and so we'll be doing the first book, Southern Bastards, because both Maya and I have loved that book. And yeah, there's a bunch of others that have arrived in the mail, so I'm excited about that. But we'll give you the whole rundown next week, and we should have Adam and Maya back next week. Once again, thank you for joining us, Andy, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
And we will see you guys next week for the last of the Andy Wilson books. So thanks, and have a good night.
So that happened. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. This band of knuckleheads will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, you can find them on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr as Funny Books and Firewater, and on Twitter as @FirewaterCast. Go to funnybooksandfirewater.com for the most up-to-date information, as well as cocktail recipes from this and past episodes. Thank you for joining us. And until next week, support your local comic shop, tip your bartender well, and stay hydrated.